Welcome everyone to our Sunday satsang here, Christmas satsang, Monday. This morning what we'll do is what we do traditionally at Sunday satsangs in the U.S. as given by Swami Kriyanandaji, with these readings from his book, Affirmations for Self-Healing, and then a reading from his book, Rays of the One Light, which has parallel commentaries from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, and then a discourse. And then we'll do a special candle offering ceremony followed by a ceremony that Swamiji wrote called a Festival of Light, which is a celebration of God's light, come to earth, come to us, which is really in a way the celebration inwardly of Christmas. And so we'll start with a reading from Swamiji's Rays of the One Light.
This reading is titled, What Was the Star of Bethlehem? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Divine vision is the opposite of worldly sight. Divine vision sees God's presence behind all outward appearances. Worldly sight sees appearances merely coating even the blazing wisdom of a saint. A master to the worldly man is a human being with perhaps a slightly better attitude than the norm. The scriptures therefore strive to demonstrate how the divine consciousness, when openly active among men in the lives of great masters, must never be viewed as an expression of ordinary human consciousness. To seek the presence of divinity behind the life of a great master is to prepare oneself to recognize that same divinity also in lower manifestations, until at last one beholds God everywhere. Thus it was that Paramhansa Yogananda, on observing his new disciple Swami Kriyananda struggling with the contrast between the Guru's human appearance and his inner divine reality, looked at him deeply one day and said, "If you only knew my consciousness." The story of the birth of Jesus Christ contains an account in the Gospel of Saint Matthew, chapter 2, of the Star of Bethlehem. The wise men who sought Jesus in his manger said, "We have seen his star in the east, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was." This account was important, for it showed all mankind that Jesus was a divine incarnation and no ordinary man, that he brought divine consciousness to earth, even though he would play a human role among human beings, and that others too, by receiving him in their inner hearts, would acquire power, as the Bible puts it, to become the sons of God. The scriptures enjoin us to meditate on the lives of great souls, that we may discover our own latent spiritual greatness. As the Bhagavad Gita puts it in the 4th chapter, "Who knows the truth touching my births on earth and my divine work when he quits the flesh, puts on its load no more, falls no more down to earthly birth. To me he comes, dear Prince." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
Blessed, happy Christmas to everyone. What a beautiful weekend we've had. The masters have said, I'm told, that at these great times of birth of the great ones, avatars, that we celebrate every year, there really is a celebration on the astral plane, and that there is truly more light coming to us. It's like the door is just cracked open a bit more than usual. And for those of us who are here to receive it, we can be changed by that light, because in the end, it's only that light that really changes us. We're going to conclude today with this festival of light, which Swami Kriyananda wrote many years ago in the 1980s as a way of affirming, celebrating who and what we really are, which is children of light, as you'll see in this. Light is not only an aspect of God. Yoganandaji said light is God. If you remember anybody, his first experience of God, does anyone remember how that experience was? In Autobiography of a Yogi as a young boy, it was God as light. He had a divine healing with Lahiri Mahashai's photo. And then he had this experience, which he describes. He's bathed in this beautiful, radiant, ecstatic light, because divine light is bliss-filled and just changes us in that way. And Master, as a child, he asks the light. He's talking to the light, because, yes, the saints talk to God as light. It's not just an impersonal light. And Master asks, what is this wondrous glow? And the light answers, I am Ishwara, I am light. The voice was as murmuring clouds. Isn't that beautiful? Murmuring clouds was the voice of light speaking to him. And the young Mukunda says, I want to be one with thee. And then Master writes, out of the slow dwindling of my divine ecstasy, I salvaged a permanent legacy of inspiration to seek God. He is eternal, ever new joy. This memory persisted long after the day of rapture. And then Master, at another time, he said that Christ took his name, Christ, and the name Isha, which is the name he was given during his lost years in India, and which he's also known by some people in the West, Isha. He said that name came from Ishwara. And in his previous incarnation, he was Elisha, which is also from Isha, Ishwara. And so this thread of God, Ishwara is God, but in this sense, it is God as light. And Christmas is really a celebration, not just the birth of this cute little child in the manger, which is sweet and devotional and uplifting, but the light of God descending to earth. And when that light is inside of us, enters us, when we are receptive to it, to as many as received him, that light is what changes us in the end. We don't change ourselves. It's the light of God, the grace of God, that changes us. As this chant, all the doors do open themselves, all the lights do light themselves. Darkness like a dark bird flies away, oh flies away. And our part simply is to open ourselves to that light. That's all we have to do. We don't have to fix ourselves. We definitely don't have to fix other people, situations outside of ourselves, or be perfect. We just have to open ourselves up to that light. And this is really the journey that's described in the Festival of Light. It's a universal journey. We go far away from God. We are created, and people ask, well, why and how, and forget about the why and the how. Just figure out, how do I get back to God? And everyone here in this room is well along on that journey. And that journey begins when we go so far away from God, and we try to live fulfilling ourselves with things and people and through the senses and outward things, and we get far away. And finally, after a million lifetimes of doing that, we realize how empty it is, and it just doesn't satisfy. And so we start asking, and we start hearing, is there a God? Where are you, God? You seem like you don't exist, but I hear you're there, and I think you must be there. And that's when that journey starts. And then maybe we have an experience of God, and very often it might be one day we're looking up at the stars at night, and we see just the infinity of the vastness of space, and we realize there must be a God. I can see in these stars and in the heavens that there is a God. And you start seeing God in this creation. And then maybe you start seeing God in more of the creation, in the mountains, and you start getting uplifted. For many people, their first experiences of the divine are in nature and in the vastness of expansive views and in creation. for me, this was a big part of my journey. It was easier for me to see God in creation, in nature. And it was very difficult for me to see God in people, which is the next step, actually. But for me, a big step in this direction, because we see God in creation, but we don't necessarily see God in this part of the creation, in ourselves. It's easier to see it out there. And for me, one big step in this direction was I was trying to be a hermit because I was trying to get away from people, which God was not in people, so I could go and see God in nature. Luckily, I learned my mistake. And I was in the mountains, and I spent many months by myself in the mountains, just being with God in nature. And one night I fell asleep, and I would just sleep with the stars as my roof. I didn't have a tent or anything, and I just had a sleeping bag, and I would lay on the ground wherever I ended up that day. And just lying on my back, looking up at the stars, you start to feel that there's something vast and infinite, and maybe I'm a part of it. And the next morning, it was very cold. There was ice on the ground, which I didn't see yet because I had a sleeping bag, and my head was inside the sleeping bag because I was so cold. The only thing outside the sleeping bag was the top of my head and my hair. My hair was like all over the place because I had really, really long hair, and it was very wild and crazy. But I was woken up that morning by someone pulling and playing with my hair. It was just so strange to wake up. And I just thought, here I am in the middle of nowhere, the most remote place. I haven't seen a person in days. And something is playing with me. Who is this? And I just poked my head out of the sleeping bag, sort of with wonder and awe. What is going on here? Something wonderful, because it wasn't like it was painful or anything. It was just very playful. And so I stuck my head out. And soon I realized that I first felt something inside my hair, because my hair was so much that it was inside my hair. It wasn't on the hair. But I felt and then heard and finally saw there was these two birds inside my hair. They were just very small birds, and they were just playing in my hair. They were fluttering their wings. They were chirping. They were so happy, and they were having so much fun. And I think maybe they were trying to build a nest or something. I don't know what they were doing. And then eventually they flew away. But it made me realize on another level that seeing God in the beauty of this creation, that it made me realize that I was part of this creation, and that God was playing with me just as God played and sang through the birds. God could sing through me. God could play with me, and that I was part of this vast creation. And then that was a step in realizing that God isn't just within us. God is part of us. We are part of God. And then that was part of my evolution of starting to see God in people, in myself, in others, and to experience the divine. And this is why Swamiji often said, he said, don't pray to God, pray in God. He said, don't meditate on God, meditate in God. Because we are in God, we are part of God. And that's the divine truth. And so this is the journey that we all take on this way, this journey back. And eventually you do start to see, in the stillness of meditation especially, that we are divine and we are just part of this divine creation. And it takes getting rid of the thoughts, stilling the waves of feeling of the heart. And this world continually tries to pull us away from that realization. And just, again, this other chant that we did, what is this life flowing through my veins? Could it be other than divine? And those are such thrilling words when you start to realize that in meditation and activity, that we are nothing but divine. But then we wake up in the morning, maybe after a sleepless night, we look in the mirror and we think, well, that could be quite other than divine, what I'm seeing there in the mirror. But then we close our eyes and we withdraw from the outward reality. And then we realize with practice, with experience, this is why regular daily meditation is so important, that when we start practicing meditation and going within, withdrawing from the seeming reality out there, we do start to have glimpses and experiences of the divinity that is within. And we start to really realize that the life flowing through these veins cannot be other than divine. And when we have that realization more and more, it becomes truly thrilling. And words can't even describe how thrilling that can be when we have those glimpses of divinity inside, all around us. And it's just, we are part of this greater reality, and that's again what this Festival of Light is all about. There was a great Catholic Christian saint that Swami Kriyananda very often quoted over the years. The most well-known one that Swamiji said about him, this man, Saint Simeon was his name, and he said that, I move my hand and Christ moves, who is my hand. And he had this realization of the divinity of his own being, but not separate from the divinity of other beings, and seeing the light and the divinity in others. And he saw God as light. He said over and over again, God is light. He experienced God as light. He talked to God as light. When he talked to God, he would talk about the radiance of your face, is the way he put it when he spoke to God, because when he saw God, there was this thrilling, divine, blessed, healing light. And so when we invite that light to come into us, to awaken us, to free us, to liberate us, that's really what, especially I think Christmas Eve and Christmas morning is about more than anything. It's just very, very simple. We have all the stories, we have all the scriptures, and scriptures are good for kind of giving us some knowledge of it. But this is why Swami Kriyananda said that simple people have an easier time of finding God. He said people, and he was partly talking about himself because he was very intellectual when he came to Yoganandaji. And he just had a difficult time getting over doubt because of the intellectuality. And he understood that the simplicity of this divinely childlike attitude that we talked about yesterday really is the way to divine freedom. And it's just beautiful that the Christ child is born as this very defenseless, tiny little being, but radiant and full of light and sending the light throughout the world. The shepherds, they were blinded by the light of the Christ being born. And I imagine they didn't get caught up in, oh, how cute this little baby is, and, just the light of God is in this cute little thing. And they just saw light. The light was blinding and radiant. And this is what the birth of Christ is really about, is the descent of light to earth to free us. And our part, so simply, is to tune into that light. And this is why Swamiji, in his interpretations of Christ, and in the very next reading in this Rays of the One Light that we just read from, it was about divine descent, about avatar, and that the main way to tune in to a divine descent is simply to tune into their consciousness, to take their name, to practice japa, to tune into them, to feel them, to invite them into ourselves. That's really the whole purpose of it. All this other stuff is probably partly to convince our minds, to convince people who are maybe more intellectually inclined. But even in the Mahabharata and the Bhagavatam, we read about Draupadi talking to Krishna, and Krishna advising her, oh, practice yoga and meditation, and you will realize me. And Draupadi just says, I can't, Lord. I can't practice these things. And Krishna asks, why not? And she says, well, I can't take my mind off of you long enough to practice these things. And Krishna just nods and says, you have it right. This is the right way. All of these other things are simply to get us to continually have our mind and our hearts on God. And when we can do that, that's how we really change. So all we need to do is that. It's very simple. This is in this reading today. Swamiji says, try to spend minutes every day tuning into God or one of the great ones. And then more and more try to have those minutes become hours. And try to do it in a sense, not just of repeating God's name. Try to do it in the sense of using the repetition of God's name to start to take us into the experience and the oneness with God. If we were practicing japa to Yogananda, for example, Om Guru, which is something that Swamiji and Master recommended for their disciples, and we were chanting Om Guru, and Yogananda just suddenly appeared before us, would we look up at him and say, Om Guru, Om Guru, Om Guru? Would we keep repeating it? No, we would just offer ourselves into his heart and into his grace and just adore and worship. As Krishna said, adore me, worship me. And that's all we really need to do. It's not words, it's of the heart. But practicing japa over and over again, what it does, it starts to tune us in to that divine reality and awareness. And so much of it is just tuning in and realizing who and what we have always been. This is just the strangeness of this whole journey, is that it's really just waking up from a dream. It's not accomplishing anything. It's not getting anywhere. We look at the saints and the masters and we think, boy, they have done so much and gotten so far spiritually. And we think of spiritual growth as having gone so far. And it's not far at all. It's always been right here. It is right here. It always has been. We've always had divine union. It's never not been there. That life flowing through these veins is and has always been divine. And we have always been divine. And the only thing, as Yoganandaji said, is that all we need is to improve our knowing. And that knowing comes, again, through deep devotional self-offering into that light. This chapter that Narayani mentioned, maybe in her book, but also in her talk the other night in Pune city, that Swamiji wrote, divinely inspired, and saying that it was purely Yogananda coming through him. And he was in this state of ecstasy after writing this chapter in the biography of Paramhansa Yogananda. And in that chapter is where he says that when we practice Kriya Yoga, every Kriya should be an act of devotional self-offering. And then the next few sentences, I'd highly recommend reading that chapter, especially after hearing what Narayani said about Swamiji writing it. But the next few sentences he explains why. Because in the end, we are only changed by divine grace. The only thing. Our part simply is to keep coming back again and again, as often as we can, morning, evening, during the day with service, as doing every, not just the Kriya technique, but every action as an act of devotional self-offering. And we'll find that in the end, it's God only that changes us. It's not we who change ourselves. There's the beautiful story of Swamiji trying to get out of intellectuality and more into devotion. And he was doing a lot of chanting and a lot of work on it, and he was making good progress with that. And he felt some, I think, sense of accomplishment, not in an overly egotistical way, because it was real, what he was experiencing. But then he was told that Yoganandaji was talking to some of the other disciples. And he was talking about Swami Kriyananda. And Yoganandaji said, look how I've changed Walter. And Swamiji realized that it was Guru, God through the Guru only, that was changing him. So our part is simply to put ourselves into the position to be changed, which is to put ourselves into that light. It is so simple. It is really not any more complicated than that. And this is the story of Christmas. It's the light coming anew to earth to remind us this is what it's all about. It's that simple. Now, Swamiji, I'll finish with a short thing that he wrote or said at a satsang about how to be a channel of light. And it answers that question of how to be a channel of that light, but it also answers the question of how to be one with that light, how to experience divine light. Because this act of devotional offering is purely an act of giving. And this is how we receive. To those who give more, they receive more. And it's that simple also, is that when we are an instrument for light, for grace, for truth, even if we don't feel it, it's still there. And so whatever little bit we feel, even offer it to God in meditation, and that light increases. And as that light increases, we change more and more. I'll read this from Swamiji, what he says about this. How to be a channel for the light. Think not of what you can get, but what you can give. Serve not people, but God through people. God is happiest, not in our efficiency, but in our increasingly humble attitude. Get yourself out of the way. Don't think of yourself, but of Him. Serve joyfully, even in obscurity. Don't look to others for endorsement. Be content to seek the Lord's smile in your heart. Be centered in the inner self. Don't let circumstances or people pull you down. Let Christ's light fill you when you work with others. Be an open window through which the Lord's sunlight can flow to all. God will support you the more you live in Him. Let God radiate in your heart and live by His inner inspiration. Work more listening to God inwardly. Ask only, Lord, are you pleased? How can I please you more? And again, dear God, tell me what you want. Help me to do what you want. You are God's child. There is nothing that is not yours. Be a radiant spirit, large, not small. Greater dignity and greater strength add nicely to your childlikeness. Be joyfully courageous, majestically confident. Be filled with the confidence that the Holy Spirit will use you. The power of the infinite is in you. Live more and more in that center where God dwells. Radiate this to others, and their lives and your own will be changed. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.